everybody, welcome to Rearview Africa with Justine, a show where we look back at the interaction of the African continent, its people, the Western world, through the lens of a certified African resident, me. This episode focuses on African art, the magnificence of people's traditions and ways of life that were pillaged so that people in a foreign land can be amazed by it. We're also going to look at how they did it and why they won't give it back. Western museums and libraries hold a large number of artifacts that they appropriated over the ages through conquest and colonialism. I love how they have all these fancy words for theft. Up to 90% of Africa's material cultural legacy, the material wealth that we get from our ancestors when they were on Earth balling, is outside the continent. This sounds like these artifacts just wandered off to explore the high seas. Frankly, that would have made for a better story. In truth, most of these were stolen by European colonial powers, looted during ethnographic missions, or acquired under questionable conditions in various markets. Say what you will about colonialists, but when they were out stealing, they went all in. Guns blazing, no morals, all hot. Picture this, it's the late 1890s in the Kingdom of Benin. The Oba had trade monopoly over the area. The Royal Niger Company, which is one syllable away from saying what they really mean, aren't happy about it. The Oba's trade monopoly had them on an extreme end of how dare this black people spectrum, so they decided to do something about it. In 1892, the British Vice Consul of the Oil River Protectorate, Henry Galway, visited Benin City hoping to open up trade and incorporate it into the British Protectorate. He had a befitting surname because where there's a goal, there's a way. Galway signs a treaty with the Oba and his chiefs with clauses in there about Oba claiming they need protection. This was in fact a lie, a powerful lie, because if someone is defending you, they could easily trip, fall and punch you back in the face. The treaty apparently granted the British free trade, but the Oba wanted custom duties. The British challenged on their audacity, considered this act hostile and in breach of the agreement. In November 1896, Phillips, the African Coast Vice Consul, asked his superior colonial ancestry, that be, to visit Benin City and the Oba to discuss the trade. In late December, he hadn't received a reply, maybe because the crow carrying his mail probably did not want to collaborate on his mission, but he decided to go anyway. Phillips sent a message to the Oba to see him. The Oba sent back, "Can't talk now, kinda busy," because the timeline was messing with his Igwe celebrations, and we all know life is for enjoyment. The story cuts to Phillips getting killed alongside all those who came with him to discuss the treaty. This is known as the Benin massacre. In response to this, the British invaded the Kingdom of Benin in January 1897. They went crazy on their war catalogue, sending warships, gunboats, and as many soldiers as possible, and in 12 days captured the city. As a deranged bonus, they also burned down Oba's palace, but they claimed it was an accident. They also sent him to exile in Calabar. Thousands of artworks and Benin bronzes were plundered and sent to Britain. 40% went to the Britain Museum, while others were gifted to the generals as spoils of war, and others were even auctioned off. Killing people because they didn't accept your little agreement is low, but killing and stealing from them is also another level of low. So far, most European museums have successfully cleared all these levels. Additionally, looting wasn't just an exclusive activity for gun wielders and warship owners. Anthropologists, or so-called missionaries, curators, and private collectors got in on the action as well in peaceful times. You all know the saying, if you can't beat them, join them by being slick in how your actions end up harming other cultures for your own profit. Now that we've established that this is how they got most African art, why won't they just give it back? We received a letter from the colonizer retreat, and here it is.
Hello, Africa. Your art is great. We love it. However, after decades of minimal consideration, we've decided to keep it. Thank you very much for reaching out. You all are going through a lot right now. Poverty, hunger, and famine, war, the cost of fuel, elections, not being able to get tickets to a Burna Boy concert, Afro Nation not coming back. I think it's best if you focused your energy on that. You're saying that this art belonged to your grandfather? Prove it. Oh, you have a family? We do too. And we too want our children's children to share in the culture of us conquering you. Oh, you want to come here and see it? good luck. You might first want to check the strength of your passport. Sincerely yours, Europe.
Returning African art is getting a big no from colonizers at Ancestry.com. There's a long-standing policy of objective refusal to seize ownership over these forcefully acquired treasures, despite numerous Africans demanding it back. That's why the Killmonger scene in Black Panther was so delightful. Plus, Michael Bay really looked great in that scene. The defense against returnism is the same defense museums give for their existence. They claim to be custodians and conservers of humanity's cultural and natural treasures. That may sound very noble, but these works of art are being held for spectation in a foreign environment. That's it. Most of your past are already a wanting spectacle. You could focus on that. I'm looking especially at you, Germany. Most of these artworks retain and perpetuate stereotypical narratives that Europeans had and still have about Africans. Getting to call people savages in the tags of your art collection while you struggle to separate racism in a refugee crisis is a great mountain of cognitive dissonance. The items on display are selected, named, organized, and identified by Europeans. This kind of power erodes the original African story and identity of these works of art. This is high filter erasure, only second to what Snapchat does to your face. Different countries have reinforced their colonial institutions in their rules of law and modus operandi. France, famously memed by this lady in a colonial rebuttal, have claimed that the art collections belong to the state and cannot be given back. This is a bigger legal battle for francophone countries they've pillaged and still have to pay hefty taxes to their colonizers. You can catch a full review on this on our next episode. Another disturbing factor that is part of the African artifacts on display in these museums are thousands of skulls of African people and collections of human remains which are directly tied to scientific racism. Imagine being so overtly racist that you accidentally create subcategories of your shameful acts. These people even had human zoos up to as recently as 1958, where people from Congo were put on display. This isn't art. This is absolute dehumanization with a cherry of what will you do about it on top. These horrific displays were referred to as cabinets of curiosity, which were then rebranded to museums to take some heat off the racist connotations. In a bid to combat the harm they've done, there have been multiple attempts to make these African displays more culturally sensitive. Attempts is an accurate description for people who will do anything but the right thing. The gravity of these historical injustices can only be addressed through repatriation. #BringBackOurArt. This restores the agency of Africans as producers of their own history. After repatriation, Africans can decide how to preserve, display, and utilize these items because most are living sources of knowledge, objects of worship, and expressions of life. For instance, human remains including skulls of African ancestors can be brought back to their ancestral lands and buried following local traditions. Cultural items could be used as sources of knowledge and storytelling for future artists and historians of the land, like a version of the mummy where the dead are left alone. The end. One great example is the large volume of Giz manuscripts and 15 tablets that were taken during the Battle of Magdala in 1868 by British troops. Let's just pause here to say that the British possessed the biggest restless leg syndrome of the colonial caravan. Tablets are sacred objects that only priests in the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo churches can touch. Imagine if someone stole all the Pope's regalia and destroyed every trace of it but kept that tiny little cup in the cabinet of curiosities. The Giz manuscripts, if given back, will be used as textbooks to thousands of Ethiopian traditional schools. Returning Benin's bronze artifacts can help honor ancestors who were exiled and maimed and help validate the ascension of the new Oba. Cast brass plaques, which once decorated the Benin Royal Palace and which provide an important historical record of the Kingdom of Benin, can be returned. African art is more than beautiful objects you get to see. They are a way of life and should be treated as such. Here is a rough estimate of how much African art is still held in Western museums. By dispossessing people of their cultural artifacts, books, and important religious and cultural relics, you dispossess them of their knowledge, their history, and philosophy. This has very concrete real-world implications. It's like the British without their tapestry of egg, bacon, sausage, and baked beans for breakfast. Museums and libraries that hold vast collections of African cultural resources must face the fact that they are continuing a legacy of dispossession similar to that of their colonial forebears. Hashtag return our art. Hey everyone, welcome to Review Africa with Justine, a show where we look back at the interaction of the African continent, its people, and the Western world through the lens of a certified African resident, still reeling from colonial shock. Me. Before we get into this episode, let's pause at this incredible photo of Senegal after they won the Africa Cup of Nations. You'll need that little happiness to carry you through this episode. Today's feature story is the tragedy of West and Central African countries as they relate to France. No, this is not about in Paris. That would require a fire bit to back it up. This story is one that has been boiling over decades, and it's perfectly summarized in this meme. For almost a century and a half, France maintained a substantial colonial empire in Africa. Lucius and Cookie would be jealous because this empire stretched from Maghreb through western and central sub-Saharan regions. Though direct rule ended in the early 1960s, French influence over its former colonies continued. Some call it neo-colonialism, the French call it work ethic. France has attempted to maintain a hegemonic foothold in Francophone Africa through political, security, economic, and cultural connections. Attempted is an undercutting descriptor for a pillager extraordinaire. Come on, these people have been excellent at it. A round of applause for colonialists who found ways to both serve their interests and keep a lasting bastion of prestige associated with legacy of past mastery. Starting us off in this journey of plummeting into the abyss is the imperialist monetary policies from Paris that French African colonies continue to endure. These policies are so tactful in setting countries back that they continue to cripple domestic economies and undermine democracy. Another pause here to say undermining democracy would be a great apology to a book for the West. By the early years of the 20th century, the French held most of what would become their colonial territory in West Africa, including present-day Senegal, Mali, Burkina Faso, Benin, Guinea, Ivory Coast, and Niger. And in more recent years have brought them all together into what is now known as France's World Cup winning team of 2018. They were all about getting to work, maybe more than Brittany, to foster production of groundnuts and cotton where appropriate conditions were present. In a bid to line their pockets from all that hard work by other people, they imposed taxation as a means of inducing participation in the cash economy. Where crops could not be grown, they gently nudged people to migrate to wage-earning areas. Would you look at that? France, darling. It looks like you understood the relatability of migration and wages back then. Why are you scared of the concept now? Keep that same energy, mon ami. Although slavery had been abolished in Europe and the New World during the middle part of the 19th century, some forms of servitude continued on the West African landscape. Their whole stance was the same as an intern in most companies, which is close to zero wages is better than no wages. In their pursuit of continuing to gaining more from whatever the Africans were going through, the French often looked the other way in order to ensure the success of their programs. Why stand up for human rights when you can stand on a pile of money, right? The French colonial encounter in West Africa was driven by commercial interests as the political administration and the economic interests were fairly uniform throughout the colonial period. Little was done to improve the lives of West Africans, although attempts were made to provide minimal health and educational services. Their CSR, colonial social responsibility, was clocking at least one school and hospital per countless atrocities for balance. In a fit of irony, more than 1 million African soldiers contributed to the defeat of Nazism and fascism in World War II. That should have been an opening credit reel to equality and respect, but that contribution is often ignored and underestimated by France, and France has always taken for granted the fact that Africans could be asked to help again in case of any military threat or war expectation. Because war is exactly like herpes. It never goes away, and you need all the help you can get. After World War II, France came back with refined culinary tastes of colonial control. Just like French cuisine, it was innovative, sophisticated, but most importantly, future-proofed. The French assembled a colonial pact that took control over the economies of West African countries. They took possession of their foreign currency reserves, hashtag the money is the motive. They control the strategic raw materials of the country, hashtag all about the source. They stationed their troops in the country with the right of free passage and demanded that all military equipment be acquired from France, even taking over the training of African police and armies. Hashtag home is where the gun is. Side note, does anyone know if hashtags are still relevant? I want to know so I can take over some of them with the energy of a French colonizer. France required that French businesses be allowed to maintain monopoly enterprises in key areas of water, electricity, ports, transport, and energy. Nothing major, just the utilities at the core of modern existence and operation. As a way to encourage progressive and free trade in the region, France not only set limits on the imports of a range of items from outside the franc zone, but also set minimum quantities of imports from France. You might think, this possibly isn't happening anymore. Take a minute to remember that picture of Senegal winning AFCON because, unfortunately, these treaties are still in force and operational. In Niger, for instance, the royalty rates were set up to benefit France's state-owned mining company Arriva and its subsidiaries. Over the past 50 years, the secretive, powerful African cell has overseen France's strategic interests in Africa, reporting only to one person, the French president. African Cell is such an obvious title for an illegal entity. They should have workshopped some other names, for example, Barrier Reef or Ninjas for Paris. Consequences of policy dependence led to dependence on the French economy, dependence on the French military, and the open door policy of French private enterprise.
Welcome to France Afrique Insurance. We come to you faster than your landlord at the end of every month. Here at France Afrique, we believe in covering everybody, including our former colonies. France Afrique Insurance believes in taking just a piece of your hard-earned money and resources and setting it aside for the benefit of every country, but most importantly, France. We believe if we can take care of us, we can take care of you. Subscribe to France Afrique Insurance today. We secure our future so you can depend on us. Service only available in French West Africa and French Equatorial Africa. Terms and conditions are mandatory. Too bad, you already signed.
Some African leaders boldly stood up against the unending imperialist tendencies of France, but their resistance was generally met with a stronger contestant: death. And France has never hesitated to eliminate presidents who posed a threat to their plans. You can't start a revolution against the French. That's their thing. France has consistently connived and been in collaboration with other Western powers to assassinate African presidents they deemed a threat to their interests. Presidents like Thomas Sankara, who denied being under France's influence, was eliminated in an assassination plot that France masterminded with the aid of Sankara's close friend and associate. Name will not be given. Here is a list of West African presidents that were assassinated by France since 1963. Intelligence agencies that have been active in doing dirty work that encompasses coups and assassinations. This level of organization and collaborative effort is a great inspiration for anyone struggling to write a villain story. French crimes in Africa don't just go straight to the shooting, that's amateur hour. They start off with misinformation campaigns that focus on control and military propaganda. You know that thing that carries away your aunties on WhatsApp. By the time they essentially wipe out your leader, you kind of bought into it like your parents or older relatives telling you to go get your shoes so you can head out together before they abandon you and start funding your trust issues. France maintained their grip on Africa through their CFA franc monetary system, which prevented former colonies from attaining economic independence. CFA, which directly translates to French colonies in Africa, is a currency named after oppression and was used to create financial stability in the region. Besides being forced to pay a colonial debt, 14 Western and Central African countries, that's Benin, Burkina Faso, Ivory Coast, Mali, Niger, Senegal, Togo, Cameroon, Central African Republic, Guinea-Bissau, Equatorial Guinea, Chad, Congo-Brazzaville, and Gabon have their national reserves held by France in France's central bank. The amount of abuse that former French colonies received were working at several colonial rates per minute. These countries were asked to put 50 to 65% of their foreign currency reserves in the French treasury. That's over half their money. But to properly secure the bag, France asked for an additional 20% for financial liabilities. If they need more, they will have to borrow it from the French government at commercial rates. Why not just ask 100% of people's lives in these countries to shut down, and if they could just find a way to collectively cease to exist? This level of financial piracy and cutthroat swindling is only second to what billionaires have unlocked. These African states are French taxpayers, but their citizens are not French and do not have access to public goods and services their money helps pay for. French people have been living off the wealth of African countries and have been doing so for over half a century. This is such a reverse sugar daddy situation. France got themselves a very poor wealthy sponsor, out here posting on the gram in paid partnership with poverty-stricken African citizens. The pepper icing on this sand grain cake is that these countries are obliged to ally only with France during situations of war or crisis. This problematic rhetoric is the reason French presidents and ministers are greeted with never-ending protests whenever they visit their former African colonies. The role of French security policy in Africa has long been recognized as a critical factor in African politics and international relations. French involvement in Africa has worked against African interests as French intervention continues to deny African countries political freedom in order to sustain their current social, economic, and political conditions. It's the human centipede ridding these countries of their agency and resources. In fact, policies portrayed as promoting stability and development can be factors of instability, dependency, domination, and subordination. For instance, when Guinea demanded independence in 1958, France unleashed its fury by destroying schools, nurseries, public administration buildings, cars, books, medicine, research institute instruments, tractors. Animals were even killed, if only there was a way to involve PETA activists. They also banned and poisoned food in warehouses. These are just simple territorial gang tactics perfected by cartels in other parts of the world, but why would it be big news when it's an actual government using it on innocent citizens of another country? These acts were meant to send a message to other colonies that the consequences of rejecting France would be high. France was taking rejection like an abusive guy who you said no to once, and he ends up with a crazy wall and your family's bones in his backyard. In March 2008, former French President Jacques Chirac said, "Without Africa, France will slide down to the rank of a third world power." Chirac's predecessor François Mitterrand prophesied in 1957, "Without Africa, France will have no history in the 21st century." Kind of a wonderful self-ban from presidents who knew what their country's true worth was. A mediocre superpower being held together by military equipment and unfettered access to someone else's uranium deposits. Over the past few years, France has faced sharp criticism across its former colonies in Africa. The criticism is rooted in a feeling that colonialist practices and paternalistic attitudes never really ended, and that's because they haven't. You can easily understand this by looking at Niger's story. Social media posts, radio shows, demonstrations, and word on the street have propelled these conversations to the forefront. You can see just how messed up everything is live from someone's kitchen, or a Tuareg on their nomadic journey losing livestock to radioactive dust. Tipping over to desperation, there have been reports claiming that France might be working with jihadists to steal gold. In Mali, where for almost a decade, French soldiers initially came at the invitation of the Malian government, they have tried and failed to stop the spread of armed Islamist groups by giving "fighting terrorists is so hard" energy. France stands accused of disrespecting Mali's highest officials through a recent coup attempt. Now they are effectively being chased from the country and other West African countries alike. They are blamed for sanctions imposed by the ECOWAS, aimed at trying to get the military government to commit to handing over power, with France assumed to be the group's puppet master. The French are also blamed for their failure to stop an insurgency that metastasized and spilled over Mali's borders, destabilizing a vast stretch of arid territory known as the Sahel. This level of bumbling idiocy is unbecoming of you, France. You used to be so good at pushing coups. How are you letting your talents go to waste? Many Africans maintain that the French have been at the front line of enslavement, colonization, and raping of their continent by stealing their gold, diamonds, and other natural resources. They also maintain that France's colonial tax is bleeding Africa and feeding France. Numerous resentments have built up against France due to the political interference and armed interventions, with one of their biggest failures being the legacy of the Rwandan 1994 genocide. France has good reason to seek to improve its image that's mostly a black hole right now. Current President Emmanuel Macron is pushing to end France-Afrique and its horrible policies, and while his PR campaign with the continent is improving, there are areas where they're still failing big time. France's commitment to letting go of the reins and giving their former colonies political and economic sovereignty remains to be seen. Hey everyone, welcome to Review Africa with Justine, a show where we look back at the interaction of the African continent, its people, the Western world through the lens of a certified African resident, continually learning that colonialism is now our horrible relative who will never leave. On this episode, we'll be focusing on the assassinations of African presidents by the West. You will think African presidents are powerful and well protected, but JFKs are scattered all over this continent. You guys remember France's prowess in this department? Some African leaders boldly stood up against the unending imperialist tendencies of France, but their resistance was generally met with a stronger contestant: death. And France has never hesitated to eliminate presidents who posed a threat to their plans. You can't start a revolution against the French. That's their thing. France has consistently connived and been in collaboration with other Western powers to assassinate African presidents they deemed a threat to their interests. Presidents like Thomas Sankara, who denied being under France's influence, was eliminated in an assassination plot that France masterminded with the aid of Sankara's close friend and associate. Name will not be given. Here is a list of the SDECE, DGSE, and DST are three French intelligence agencies that have been active in doing dirty work that encompasses coups and assassinations. This level of organization and collaborative effort is a great inspiration for anyone struggling to write a villain story. French crimes in Africa don't just go straight to the shooting, that's amateur hour. France takes its job of wielding power unnecessarily and putting the fear of the West in African countries very seriously. I'm taking a chance with my own life doing this piece, so if anything happens to me, remember me as a comedian. That is my legacy. Unfortunately, France has assassinated or helped in assassinating a total of 22 presidents since 1963. Here are their names. You all know we can't talk about the West without Uncle Sam of the red, blue, and white. The American CIA has also dipped its feet in presidential takeouts. How dare you, America? You really have no willpower against minding other people's business, right? Specifically in how the CIA played a role in Congo's first elected Prime Minister Patrice Lumumba's assassination. In 1958, a year after Ghana got independence, the country hosted a conference of African leaders, the first such gathering of its kind and a rare sighting of African leaders you could call visionaries. At the invitation of Ghana's newly elected Prime Minister Kwame Nkrumah, seen here brandishing his great mind and double forehead, more than 300 leaders from 28 territories across Africa attended. One of the attendees was Patrice Lumumba of the still Belgian Congo and Frantz Fanon, who was still living in still French Algeria. It was a time of unlimited potential for a group of people determined to chart a new course for their homelands. And parting, of course. I hope some of those leaders twerked and danced because life was going to come at them sideways like those logging trucks in Final Destination. While they were happy about what the future held, Prime Minister Kwame, the host, wanted his guests not to forget the dangers that lay ahead. Because where there was once a colonizer, there's always a colonizer looking to fill the gap. In 1960, the Congo gained independence. They were finally free from colonial shackles. for like 2 seconds. Due to Congo's size, position near South Africa's bastions of white rule and reserves of high-quality uranium at the Shikolobwe mine in Katanga province, the country soon became a target. The Congo was so naturally resource wealthy that the danger sent itself a personal invite. The CIA conducted a series of fast-paced covert action operations in DRC. The operations were meant to kill 2 birds with one neo-colonial stone by stabilizing the government and minimizing communist influence in the country. They also launched a massive PR campaign to denounce Lumumba and promote Mobutu. They were like, "Hey yo, check out my boy Mobutu, lovable guy, drip from here to Kinshasa. He could pass for Prince of Zamunda. He loves music and can do that wine your waist thing. You know the deal. He's the best guy for the job." Nkrumah possessed an acute understanding of the threat in his "That's so Raven" moment because only months after his speech, Lumumba was assassinated by a Belgian and Congolese firing squad. Pausing here to say that Africans are always fighting back. Their work may not make the sexy soldier patriotic kind of a heart movie, but they're always fighting. Most of the times it ends like this. This assassination happened on 17th January 1961, and it was led by Congolese troops in the mineral-rich province of Katanga, ruled by Moise Tshombe. Franz, or whatever his name is, the Belgian police commissioner, was probably the last Westerner to see Lumumba alive. His death opened the Pandora's box to decades of pro-Western tyranny in the country. Lumumba's assassination is remembered today as the Challenger Deep. I'm using a geographical reference because it's the only way to capture the low point of the early years of African independence. According to British scholar Susan Williams' book, White Malice, The CIA and the Recolonization of Africa, the CIA was one of the chief architects of the plot as per orders from President Eisenhower. Other contributors to Patrice Lumumba's death were also the MI6. Congo's first elected prime minister was Patrice Lumumba, who was immediately faced with a breakdown of order. Which country leader hasn't? That's why they invented the first 100 days so that it feels like they know what they're doing. When Patrice came to power, there was an army revolt while secessionist groups from mineral-rich province of Katanga took over. This was bound to happen because every treasure island does have a couple of pirates. Due to this, Belgian paratroopers made their way back to get a piece of the action under the guise of restoring security. The itch to be a white savior surpasses all human understanding. Stressed out by this ongoing turmoil, Lumumba made a fateful step. He turned to the Soviet Union for help. You don't ask the Russians for help. They're the white enemy of the great white beyond. This set of panic in London and Washington, who feared the Soviets would get a foothold in Africa, much as they had done in Cuba. They were probably like, they can't have what we have. Those Africans are ours to assist on whatever we want. In the White House, President Eisenhower held a National Security Council meeting in the summer of 1960, in which at one point he turned to the CIA director and used the words "eliminated" in terms of what he wanted to do with Lumumba. Oh, Eisenhower, for someone who died with congestive heart failure, his heart was always in the wrong place. Following these orders, the CIA got to work. They came up with a series of plans, including snipers and poison toothpaste, to get rid of the Congolese leader. Snipers, I get. Badass, very cinematic. But poison toothpaste, this is horrible. Maybe that's why 1 out of every dentist doesn't recommend one brand. Although they had all these plans, they were not carried out because CIA man on the ground Larry Devlin said he was reluctant to see them through. Sometimes you just need to ignore your boss in a bid to save a life. However, some people in London were excited to step up to complete the murder. Can't just let an opportunity squander itself. Eminem taught us all better. A Foreign Office official called Howard Smith wrote a memo outlining a number of options. The first is the simple one of removing him from the scene by killing him. The civil servant and later the head of MI5 wrote of Lumumba, who was ousted from power but still considered a threat. It was concluded that MI6 conspired with the CIA to overthrow, even assassinate Patrice Lumumba, Congo's first democratically elected prime minister. Another president who met his untimely demise was Libyan President Muammar Gaddafi, a man who was always dressed like he was cosplaying a decorated army general or he was ready for a Persian party. Thanks to the 2016 publication of Hillary Clinton's emails, the reason behind NATO's entry into Libya was revealed. One of the key reasons for NATO's invasion was to prevent the creation of an independent hard currency in Africa that would free the continent of its economic bondage under the dollar, the IMF, and the French African franc. If you watched the previous episode, you know no one wants to give up the economic power over anyone. It's like the last slice of anything. You can call dibs all you want, but whoever's faster and stronger wins. That hard currency would have allowed Africa to shake off its last heavy chains of colonial exploitation. Africa really had a Martin Luther King Jr. moment for economic freedom. The brief visit of then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton to Libya in October 2011 was referred to by the media as a victory lap. That's what you call a win over people who will need handouts and drown in the Mediterranean for years to come. Before 2011, Libya had achieved economic independence, its own water, its own food, its own oil, money, its own state-owned bank. I know some of you are doubting that for an African country, but they had done it mostly under Gaddafi, and Libya became Africa's richest country. He was a problematic individual, but he knew how to get things done. Problematic but getting things done is also the full title of many presidents. During his presidency, education and medical treatment were free, and having a home was considered a human right. American leaders were probably jealous that they couldn't pull this off in their first world in the first place. Libyans participated in the original system of democracy. The country boasted of the world's largest irrigation system called the Great Man-Made River Project, which brought water from the desert to the cities and coastal areas. And Gaddafi was embarking on a program to spread this model throughout Africa. I'm not one to fully trust any politician, but someone seeking to improve the quality of lives of citizens would have won over a hater like me. But that was before US NATO forces bombed the irrigation system and wreaked havoc on the country. This is a perfect plan for anyone trying to look down to bring down any nation. If people have no food or water, you're clear for takeoff into a full-on war. During President Obama's term, the situation on the ground in Libya was so bad that he asked his advisors to draw up options, including a new military front in Libya. The Defense Department was reportedly standing ready with the full spectrum of military operations required. Gaddafi's assassination followed NATO's more than 1 month-long siege of Sirte, the Libyan coastal city that was Gaddafi's hometown and center of his support. 1 month is a long time to be looking for someone. Personally, I'm very good at giving up after an hour. The assault of this city of 100,000 left virtually every building smashed, with untold numbers of civilians dead and stricken by disease as they were deprived of food, water, medical care, and other basic necessities. Gaddafi was apparently traveling in a convoy of vehicles attempting to break out of the siege after the last bastion of resistance had fallen to NATO-backed rebels. Okay, this might be a mean thing to say, but why was he in a convoy? You know, you have to take a decoy car, shave your head, and have 4 stunt doubles dressed like they were going to a Persian party, and then you can probably escape. On 20th October 2011, NATO warplanes attacked the convoy, leaving a number of vehicles in flames and preventing it from moving forward. And it is at this time that armed anti-Gaddafi militias moved in for the kill. Both US and France claimed credit for the roles in the murder of Gaddafi. Of course they did. They are like a dynamic superhero duo of setting Africa back a few presidents. And remember, African nations are always fighting against imperialism. Always. Most of them just don't make to tell their stories. Thanks for watching Rearview Africa with Justine. Please subscribe, follow, share, and like this video. It's the best way to support us. And remember, Africa is always watching.